Good morning. I'm Lori Burstein, First Selectman of Ellington, and today my guest here with me is our State Representative, Jamie Foster, serving Ellington, East Windsor, and Vernon. And my other guest is First Selectman of the town of East Windsor, Jason Bauza. Thank you both for joining me today.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
It's nice to be here.
Well, it's very nice to have you as my neighboring town, and we've all worked very well together with shared visions and challenges we faced in towns, finding solutions, and I always appreciate both of your support in our town and what we can do to help one another.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
So would you like to, we can talk about some of the challenges we have faced in our town. What we can talk about, I know with both you and I, we've had problems with firemen, finding volunteers and emergency services, and there's a lack of overall volunteers and stuff.
I think certainly that is an issue that particularly smaller towns are facing. And East Windsor and Ellington are very different communities, but they're also communities that share similar problems, like many towns in Connecticut are facing. One of the things I think more generally that we're trying to work through is how do we maintain our local identities, those things that make our towns really special places, while at the same time trying to meet the needs that our constituents expect in a 21st century dynamic. And volunteerism certainly is one of those things where it's getting harder and harder to find.
And our towns are growing. That's the thing. As our population grows, our needs become even more apparent with the volunteers.
Right. And volunteerism is just a decline. That's like a modern society change that I think it's going to take policy levers to change, really, just like things that you can do on the local level, and hopefully we can collaborate and do on the state level, but really just people, there's not a stay-at-home parent and a working parent. People aren't retiring with huge durations of vibrant years that they're spending locally volunteering as in the same level. And we have really high volunteer populations in both of our towns who do incredible work, but that people have a 40-hour work week with plenty of time to spare for volunteering for the fire department in people's young years is just not the trend anymore.
And as our older volunteers age, they've been volunteering for 20, 30 years, and now they're aging, and the newer people aren't coming in to help.
And they're not dedicating as much time because people's lives just don't allow it anymore.
It's also taking more time. I mean, in order to become a rated firefighter, it's hundreds of hours of classroom time before you can even start doing the thing that you stepped up to volunteer to do.
Yep. So it's a huge commitment.
Yeah, and those volunteer hours are designed to make sure that people are being kept safe while they're performing those functions. But at the same time, it becomes like another barrier that we collectively need to figure out how to get around to allow volunteers to do that volunteer work and support the community, because the alternative is very expensive. It's very expensive to go from a volunteer fire service to a professional fire service. It's harmful to a democracy to lose people willing to volunteer for boards and commissions and turn that over to a staff function. So kind of figuring out how to incentivize and invite in those people to continue to provide that volunteer service really is kind of a public policy issue that doesn't know town borders at this point. It's a problem we're all trying to face.
And I know you've worked on bills to help. There's different bills that are helping to support our needs with volunteer.
Yeah, we can actually, and I can send this so it could go on the town website, or we can share it out on social media because we have a great line-by-line summary. But there's a big bill this year, an aircraft labor bill, and it included a bunch of incentives for local fire, local police recruitment and retention, National Guard recruitment and retention, and it also included pipelines for National Guardsmen and soldiers, sailors who are looking for jobs post-service or during service where they could work in the trades. And so really we're realizing that sometimes the pendulum swings in labor development. We really need to make sure that we have enough people working in the jobs that we need, and that we're preparing for a future where people are matriculating through our school systems and finding the jobs and careers that they want. And I will say, part of the volunteerism is people like young people are, even though they are doing that in our schools and there's Explorer programs, not every town really has that. And that used to be a model that happened in a lot more schools, but kids are so stretched these days. They're doing so many extracurriculars that volunteering isn't always one of them. But yeah, there's a big piece of legislation this year acknowledging that recruitment and retention is a challenge that we're going to face. And so it has some strategies, but I think we're going to keep on working on it year after year because we need to find solutions that are affordable for the state and the town and also lucrative enough for people to make the choice to be in these roles. So
There's something with colleges, right, too?
yeah,
that
so
they're
there's
gonna
some
incentivize.
tuition waivers and fee waivers for volunteers in those services, and those make a really big difference in hopefully recruiting and retaining folks.
Yeah, that's
Kind
wonderful.
of like modeling the premise around the GI Bill towards first responders.
Correct.
Yeah. And that would cover like firemen, EMS, and National Guard.
And police, yeah.
And police.
Yep.
Very good. So your
Yep.
emergency service, that's a pretty
Yep.
big thing.
Yeah.
And I know other challenges we faced. Preserving Ellington being very much a farming community, and East Windsor, you have a great deal of farmland, and you've worked hard on farmland preservation.
Yeah, in the last 6 years since I've been in office, we have seen tranches of $7 to $11 million be set aside for farmland preservation on governor's bonds agendas and throughout legislative packages that have been put forward. And my hope is that that'll be a trend that continues. The fact of the matter is people's land is their biggest asset as farmers. And the more that we can do to get folks to preserve that open space and still be able to farm the land and have revenue, the more likely we are to see that space maintained. What happens when you have a generation of farmers and the next generation's not ready to take it over, if they don't have a revenue generating option in that land, they are not going to continue on farming it. And the fact of the matter is building homes and solar developments are just more lucrative than farming is. And farming has gotten tougher and tougher. I mean, even in the 6 years that I've been in office, the amounts of complaints and struggles that farmers see and that they share with me are bigger each and every year. There was a year where the entire state's worth of peaches were eradicated from a hailstorm. And last year, people had tremendous loss in their berries. And several farms in the region aren't doing berries anymore, and definitely not doing pick your own, because people's experience with fruit after those dramatic weather events, they expect to go to pick your own and have their pick.
is
They don't
beautiful.
realize that the weather really affects a farmer's ability to have beautiful
They might
fruit
be
to pick.
smaller, yeah.
Yeah.
I know we had, you coordinated the governor back in, was it April? March.
Yeah.
March. It seemed like it was only yesterday. A solar agricultural tour that our towns partnered with, and that was kind of showing how meaningful the farmlands are and what we can do to support it so that they won't want to lease to solar.
And I think, that legislation, one of the things that was enacted in it is that we want to find ways for farmers to continue to generate revenue in the land that they have. So in addition to us making plans for there to be preservation of farmland and preferred siting that balances solar grid scale development and local farm development, we realize that having agrivoltaics is a good option for some farmers that they want. I mean, I think one of the biggest barriers that we've had in this sort of struggle between solar and farmland preservation forever has been the Farm Bureau, which represents all the farmers in the region. They do not have an official stance on farmland preservation and solar development because they believe in it being the right of a farmer to make the choice of what they do with their own land. And that's true.
Yeah, you have to respect that.
And so that's a struggle. And so the idea that there's some way that we can incentivize agrivoltaics or dual use so that we were able to maintain sort of the rural character, and it's not throwing a bee box on a solar development, but it's real and true agriculture, and the agriculture is visible to the neighbors, so the neighbors still have the aesthetic. Those kinds of balancing acts I think people in our community really want. Mm-hmm. But what I would say that I think is the most important thing that I've learned from agriculture, and Jason certainly knows this better than me, is that we can't tell a farmer what to do. They've been farming on their land for usually multiple generations, and they have been doing it a certain way for multiple generations, and it is getting harder and harder to farm. And so what you find often when people are upset about solar development, it's not the landowner who's upset. It's not even necessarily the farms, though sometimes it is a leasing farm. It's the neighbors who are upset because they bought a home and next door was farmland. And there are ways that we can preserve that aesthetic, and hopefully this working group that Jason's a member of that'll start will hopefully be an opportunity for us to make sure that neighbors are still having good positive experiences when there is a neighbor, but also just like determining what a maximum saturation in a given community is,
Exactly.
which we've exceeded in our region by.
It changes the
10.
face of your town and your plans on your economic conservation development. It changes if it gets oversaturated.
It's not even doing that. So it's doing more than that. When you have grid scale solar projects come into a community, it has a ripple effect, and it's not just on the abutting property owners who are unhappy that now they're living next to a power plant instead of next to a farm, but in Connecticut, agriculture is a $4 billion industry. Think about that. It's a $4 billion industry every year. And the largest dairy farm in Connecticut, as you know, is in Ellington,
Oak Ridge.
Connecticut.
Yep.
When I started working at the Connecticut Department of Agriculture in 2013, there were 125 dairy farms in Connecticut. Now there's less than 85. That impacts the agricultural economy. And anytime you take support lands out of agricultural production, it's making it harder and harder for the dairy industry to survive. It's making it harder and harder to make sure that there's the support crops that they need,
They
whether
have to
it's
feed the cows.
right. I mean,
Even the industry that repairs like tractors, like the dairy industry is the biggest driver of their business market. So the companies that do repairs and improve tractors. So it's like there is a
There's
tremendous ripple effect. Yeah.
Right. Right. And, the efforts around farmland preservation are important efforts. And again, when I worked at DOAG, that was one of our most important projects. But what we're seeing is these hedge fund-backed corporations are coming into communities and approaching landowners. And by the time towns are made aware of those conversations, or the state is made aware of those conversations, there's already at least
it's
an
already
option,
in
if not a sale in place. So the farmland preservation program could take 12 to 24 months to go through all of the approval processes. And by the time we could even start that, it's already a fait accompli in terms of the engagement between the developer and the landowner.
We're not getting a fair shot at trying to help and be a partner in it.
And I think, I don't know about you, but I feel like this has been a learning curve for us too. So we raised, 4 years ago, we raised the amount, the ceiling that the state farmland preservation can pay, hoping to make it more competitive. But the thing is, they've already signed a contract with the solar developer. So it's not even like after they've had this conversation, the town can say, oh no, but we can pay you now more than maybe 10 years ago when you did farmland preservation. And so you miss the chance to perhaps offer another, maybe more interesting option, which is that they still have rights to their land.
It's great that you're going to be on that panel
Yeah.
and part of that board and showing them the perspective that as a town.
We had our first meeting yesterday, and I've got some observations about it already. One of the things that they're not doing is they're not allowing there to be a public process. It's the conversation is already excluding the public from even hearing what we're talking about, and that's the wrong way to go when there's an issue like this that affects so many people from a financial standpoint, from an aesthetic standpoint, from a quality of life standpoint, and from an emotional standpoint. It ought to be an open process, and the advisory council that's being managed through the Department of Energy is really not sensitive to the opportunities that we should be providing to invite people into the process. So that was one of my first observations.
That's a complaint that people have about the siting council. I mean, like they don't have access to them in person in a building. They can't, the elderly farmer next door can't go knock on the door and say, hey, tell me about how this works, because there's no one to call. There's no one to knock on a door for and talk to. And that's how people do business in our towns. I mean, people walk into both of your offices, people knock on my door all the time. That's how they bring me their ideas and suggestions. And
I
so
love
the fact
that.
I know, the fact that we're expecting the same people whose best way of accessing us is running into us at the farmer's market or seeing us when we're walking our dog on the street, telling them, like, you have to send an email and we have 5 business days and get a response from the attorney on legal letterhead saying they acknowledge your correspondence, but they have not answered any of your questions. People are frustrated and they have every right to be. It's annoying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So another thing, schools. We have the Windermere project, which is moving along, and it's close to like completion, and it's wonderful because we got 70% covered.
Yes.
By grants, thanks to you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, that was
That's
a really
big-
cool
big
first
one.
experience. So my first experience navigating school construction, we were able to get an increased reimbursement for the entire project over what Ellington's baseline is. And so
A huge amount.
It's it'll be over $10 million of an increase in assets to the town, based on however amount the final project cost is, but the increase of reimbursement is an increase of 14%. And so that makes a huge difference in the total cost of construction. And the nice amount is like what was originally quoted. It's gone up since then, and maybe it'll go down.
Yeah.
But the total percentage that the state will reimburse is a higher amount. And it's really cool. My kids go to Windermere School. It's
We
been
live right
amazing
near
to
it.
see. It's been amazing to see the construction move along and throughout that process. And I think
They're busy. They're constantly.
they're super busy. Local businesses doing the construction, which I think is really
That's
a
very
cool
nice.
experience. And it's beautiful. The classrooms look wonderful. Really state-of-the-art technology, but really thoughtful, everything about the plan and design. The playground is wonderful. My kids are very happy. We can't wait to see what the preschool playground looks like when that's done. But it's been a really cool experience to see that. And I mean, we've done that too, a playground that we opened in East Windsor since I've been in office. Those are the projects that we've done things to get local reimbursement for roads and bridges, the things that are necessary. And those are fun because that lowers your tax
Yes.
burden on the municipal level. So we're always happy. We did a culvert in East Windsor. We've done some
That's right.
road work in Ellington that's been covered by the state budget. But it is really nice to see people appreciate the things that you've done. And to see people happy. Someone sent me a message the other day about the library reading garden in front of the Hall Memorial Library, which is something we covered with state
somebody
costs.
was posting on Facebook too, their kids reading at that reading garden
Yes.
outside, and it was a beautiful day for that.
Yes.
And just really embracing that and having gratitude for that.
Yeah, it's
Which is
beautiful.
really nice.
Yeah.
I think that those are really good examples about how important the partnerships are between local leaders and state leaders, and when the opportunity presents itself, federal leaders as well. I mean, we have staffs at our level that can get projects accomplished and that people can benefit from and see the fruits of their tax dollars being spent. But what Representative Foster can deliver, what Senator Anwar can deliver, what the Congressman Courtney's office and the Senate offices can deliver is money. And that makes things happen. So that partnership over time really serves to benefit your community and my community and the communities that our legislators are serving.
And some of these are like really stubborn problems that have been really hard to fix. And I know like you and I have been working on a water expansion
for
project
potable.
to get potable water to people who haven't had potable water in a really long time. Honestly, when I was door knocking to run for office for the first time, learning that so many of our neighbors didn't have potable water in their homes, saltwater erosion of their pipes from too much salt, from road salt runoff, or EDB and TCB from like old day tobacco farming processes, or nitrate infiltration. And that's just going to happen in agricultural towns. There will be nitrate infiltration. And so expanding city water options when there was a historic manure spill, for example, and people don't have potable water, or a flood and people don't have potable water, extending access to people having potable water makes a really big difference. So we have, I think, what was your metaphor? Do you call it a hamburger of funding?
No, it's a funding lasagna.
Funding lasagna, that's it.
So we have an entire neighborhood that's on a failing community well, and a housing authority adjacent to that is not supported by fire hydrants, which is just terrifying on its face. And so,
I almost feel like you need a knock on wood every time you say that.
well, only for a little bit longer because we finally have a start date. But working with Representative Foster and our congressional partners, we were able to get state fund $4 million in state funding and another $1.2 million in federal funding to extend Connecticut water service to these affected neighborhoods. Initially, the congressional appropriation went specifically to the neighborhood association, and there's just no way that they would have been able to jump through all of the government red tape that we have had to. This was a 2022 federal appropriation. We're starting it in August of 2026 because we had to get Congress to change the appropriation to the town so that we could use our resources and our expertise to help jump through all of the Buy America, Build America, the American Iron and Steel Act, the CHRO and EEOC certifications, and on and on and on with all of the requirements. There's no way that a group of residents would have been able to navigate that, and they would have lost the money.
Oh, absolutely.
So extending the knowledge base of the town to help accomplish that project for people who need it that's impactful, and that's one of those things that people can say, like, our government is working for us.
And I think that's like one of the reasons it's nice to have this conversation where we're all working together and talking about things that we do, because we're working on a water line expansion in Ellington. We've learned a lot throughout this process. But honestly, that grant, the first time we wrote one of those grants, we did it in a narrow timeline. When we did yours, we did the first one in 30 minutes in the Capitol building. In my head, it was midnight and the sun was way, it was a 30-minute application. And I'm sitting there, and the Connecticut Water Company had a meeting with us for something else. Senator Anwar is giving me random statistics about public health impacts of water contamination. Jason's giving me the footage of the water line expansion, the roads that it needs to cross, and we're all just like dictating grant language, and I'm speed, fast and furious typing it, and we were able to use some of that language in helping your application. And I think that those kinds of collaborations, like, no one can do this work alone. And so people really need a team of people who you can call, like, I'm so sorry to both of you for calling you nights and evenings and weekends.
I love that. I've had calls from you on like a Saturday night at 10 as you're writing some legislation and thinking that's so amazing because you're trying to do what's great for your communities. And I love that you will say, well, help me with this legislation. Like, here, this is what I'm putting. What are your needs and stuff? And it's just terrific.
And I'll say, like, you guys have great staff working for you, like your police departments and the state police. Like, when we have a public safety issue and we're working on radios, for example, like the Ellington Town Police in Ellington had given the tour. They had an idea. We were able to get that into bonding and legislation. The chief of police in East Windsor, super responsive. And that kind of teamwork, being able to facilitate those interactions and talk to folks directly and get information, no legislator should be legislating in isolation. And so it's really helpful to have people
working with your town, with the radios, and coordinating.
One of the things I just want to give you some credit for is how aggressively you have jumped into these collaborative processes, and that will yield benefits for your town without a question. And I think about our participation in the Capital Region Council of Governments,
that is terrific. I love
in
that.
CCM, and what I get out of those. You get information that comes from the staff that's working with those organizations, and that's helpful. But when we're able to jump on a Zoom call with 8 or 10 other municipal leaders and just have very frank, candid conversations about issues that we're going through, and somebody else can say, oh, I just had that come up a couple months ago. This is how we handle it.
The regional meetings are so important. Talking with our neighboring first selectmen and mayors, it's been so helpful.
And those are the experiences and the contacts that help us to do our jobs better. That's that collaboration that Representative Foster was talking about. And you can see it come to fruition when you're able to draw on those conversations and those experiences to address an issue that you have locally.
I mean, even the way you guys have really steered a little bit Connecticut Conference of Municipalities this year on the uniform capacity tax. Like, that dynamic was challenging in years previously, and the two of you were able to be really helpful this year.
We're running short on time, but I did want to talk about veterans real quick.
Yes.
If you could give me a quick, you've done a lot for the veterans.
Sure. So in the last 2 years, we started a new philosophy, and that's that we're passing veterans aircraft carriers. Fun rule of thumb is that's actually taboo in the legislature to put a lot of bills together, but we've worked really hard to make that committee bipartisan, and in doing such, we're building these bills where we're putting all of this legislation that oftentimes takes several years to pass. We're putting them all together in one bill. So 2 years ago, we passed the biggest reform that's ever been in municipal property tax for veterans, but also for veterans accessing social service programs. So we're not counting their disability payments towards their access to SNAP and Medicaid, which makes a big difference for low-income vets. But we are also, this year, we passed two big reforms. One is troops to trades, and the other big reform is the creation of a veterans dental program, which was something that was not adequately covered by the VA previously. So now Connecticut has $1 million every year allocated to this program that veterans who meet income requirements can get access to free dental care.
And that came out of like the Veterans Coffee House, didn't it?
Yeah, the Ellington Veterans
Yeah.
Coffee House.
Yeah.
And it was a really lovely conversation. I was able to go and tell them, the same people who asked me for it, I was able to announce.
That's pretty awesome. I want to thank you both so much for joining me today. I just want to tell our viewers about some upcoming events. This Thursday, July 23rd, this is going to be very cool. Horizon Wing Rehabilitation Education will have a Birds of Prey event at Hall Memorial Library at 6:30, which will be very, very cool. The Ellington Historical Society will have a Connecticut Boys at Gettysburg, where visitors will discover stories of Connecticut soldiers who fought in Gettysburg through interactive displays. The town of Ellington will be honoring our veterans and Korean War veterans in August. Letters were sent out to those who served in that era. If you've not received a letter and you served in that era, please contact Julia at Town Hall. The Trails Committee will host a meteor shower watch party at Pinney Field in August. Check out their newsletter on the website for the date. It hasn't been posted yet, but it's coming in August. And Summer Concert Series, August 20th, will be the Acoustic Rick at Marketplace from 6 to 8, and it's just a lovely event. They just had that. It was part of the opioid settlement fund, and as a result, we have these great concert series, and there's people who have dealt with the pain and suffering of losing loved ones and trying to make awareness and give information to help others, but also spreading positivity with the music. And it's just really, it's a great time for families to come and have some positivity. So thank you all. I really appreciate it. Have a good day, and we'll see you next month.